Alrighty, so here we go. It's time to do the preview of these first round matchup as we are going to talk about the four Eastern Conference first round matchup and the four Western Conference first round matchup as well. And of course, all these games are the best of three series, and whether you like the best of three series or not, this is of course what we're going to get at least in these next couple of weeks. And by the way, I'm also wearing Chicago, and I decided to wear a jersey of a team that's already eliminated because obviously, I don't want to wear a jersey of a team that's still in the playoffs right now because then people are going to accuse that I've just jinxed those team. Although I'm pretty sure people have already accused me when it comes to jinxing their team because, yeah, my prediction so far in terms of the playoffs has been pretty bad. But that being said, let us actually begin these preview of these Eastern Conference game, and I have Eastern Conference on this board, and on the other board are the Western Conference first round matchup. And we start off with the first game that will happen tomorrow, and this is why I'm doing it today instead of tomorrow because I got to do this before we get the first playoff game in the first round happen, and that of course is Inter Miami versus Atlanta United. And I decided the way I do this preview is that I put up when the game is going to happen in the best of three series, the all-time meeting, and then also look at the last five games heading into the playoffs. And despite the fact that I've said before yesterday in my review between the Whitecaps and the Timbers how if there's one thing we know about the playoffs so far, at least from the two playing game, it feels like the run of form heading into the playoffs doesn't really mean anything. It feels like it's a brand new season once the playoffs begin. But I'll still look at that, see maybe which team is going to be heading into the playoffs on a relatively good form and which one are not. But in this game between Miami and Atlanta, we have game one happening tomorrow at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific, and then game number two in Atlanta is going to be happening on November 2nd, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Keep in mind, one of the things that is a big criticism, besides the best of three series, is the scheduling for these playoff game, and it's kind of bizarre the fact that they decided to have these games kind of spread out. I mean, I can understand that they want to spread things out because they can have more eyes on a specific game, and now that we're in the playoffs, they're going to try to do something similar to what we saw in the Leeds Cup, where all these games are spread out throughout the day. But just because that, of course, might help the ratings, it might help people keep an eye on these games without flipping to another game that is going on at the same time. Doesn't mean it's going to help the attendance. The attendance, I'll tell you what, for these midweek games, it's going to be tough. It's going to be a big test. Midweek games have always been tough draw when it comes to the crowd, and playoffs is no difference. Playoff game attendance is going to take a dip, and we saw it in the play-in round two, where while it was pretty packed in Stade Saputo for the game between Montreal and Atlanta, it wasn't really that completely full at Providence Park for the game between the Portland Timbers and the Vancouver Whitecaps. I definitely saw some empty green seats even when the game was competitive, and obviously as the game was not competitive, there was tons of empty green seats around Providence Park. But that being said, in terms of the all-time meeting in this game between Atlanta and Miami, 5-4-5 is the all-time meeting. And again, one of the things about this one, as much as I'm pretty sure MLS and also Apple TV is rooting for Inter Miami to move on into the next round. I mean, Atlanta isn't really a matchup that Miami has matched very well, and that kind of shown in the last five head-to-head matchup where it's hard to believe. But Atlanta has not lost to Miami this season. They drew 2-2 the last time both of these teams play against each other. Before Atlanta actually won 3-1 on the road against Inter Miami, one of the rare teams to go to Chase Stadium and get all 3 points. They won 5-2 against Inter Miami before Miami did win 2-1 against Atlanta, and then Atlanta winning 2-0 against Inter Miami. Looking at the last five games for Inter Miami, well, they've been red hot heading into this game. In the last three games, I mean, they just put a 6 spot against New England, and they were able to smash that points record, win in emphatic fashion with a 6-2 win. Then they won 1-0 on the road against Toronto. Then they won 3-2 on the road against Columbus, a matchup that seems like it could be a preview of the Eastern Conference final, and could be a preview of potentially whoever wins that one maybe have a chance to win the whole thing in general, and that's no disrespect to the Western Conference, that is. But then it was a 1-1 draw between them and Charlotte. I was there in person to see that game, and then it drew 1-1 against NYCFC. For Atlanta, all of a sudden, they kind of been on a relatively good form themselves. They almost, though, blew the game against Montreal, blowing a 2-0 lead, but still winning the PK shot by a 5-4 scoreline. Then they won 2-1 against Orlando City, and they had to win that game. I mean, if they didn't win that game and didn't get help, they probably wouldn't be at this stage right now against Inter Miami. Then they won 2-1 at home against the Red Bulls before losing 2-1 against Montreal at home, which I thought that was kind of the death blow for Orlando Hope to make the playoffs. Then they drew 1-1 against the Philadelphia Union. And again, the odds are definitely stacked against Atlanta United. I mean, this is a team that they're facing again against a Messi and Friend team that is going to be pretty much in full strength. And that, again, if there's one thing we talk about this season with Inter Miami, you have to be perfect against them. If you're not perfect against them, you're going to be punished. And again, as I said, Atlanta has shown that they have shown that perfect perfection against Inter Miami. And that, again, this is a matchup that I'm pretty sure coming into this one, if you ask Inter Miami and which team that they probably don't want to face, at least in the first round, Atlanta surprisingly might be right up there on the list. Again, for whatever reason, they just kind of had their number recently, and that we'll see whether or not if that continue. Obviously, I'm pretty sure Don Gabbard and the Apple TV higher up would definitely don't want that to happen, because the last thing they want is to see their money generating and their rating generating team get knocked out in the first round of the playoffs. Now, moving on, we got Orlando City versus Charlotte FC. So Orlando, the number 4 seed, take on the number 5 seed Charlotte. Now, I have said that people are saying that this is probably the matchup that we might have the higher seed potentially fall. So again, I mean, do you count this as an upset if a 5 seed upset a 4 seed? Usually, whenever there's like a 4v5 matchup, it's relatively close. But anyway, in terms of game number 1, it's going to be happening on October 27th, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. And then game number 2 will happen on November 1st, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. And the last game is going to be a week ahead with the game starting at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. There's definitely a lot of games that we're going to see how there's going to be a bit of a quick turnaround between game 1 and game 2 compared to game 2 and game 3. And by the way, I haven't even mentioned it. Game 3 obviously is necessary if both of these teams are able to win their respective first 2 games. All-time meeting, 3-2 in favor of Orlando City. Last 5 head-to-head matchup, Orlando won 2-0 against Charlotte before it was a 2-2 draw between both of these teams. Then it was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams before Charlotte winning 2-1 against Orlando. And then Orlando returned the favorite by winning against Charlotte 2-1. Now, looking at the last 5 games for Orlando, they did lose their decision day game against Atlanta United. They couldn't quite end their biggest rival season on decision day. But before that, they won 3-1 against Cincinnati before winning 2-1 against the Union. Then they won 3-1 against Dallas before losing 4-3 to Columbus. But they put up a heck of a fight in that game against the Columbus Crew. For Charlotte, they won 3-0 on the road against DC to eliminate them from the playoffs. Then they won 2-0 against Montreal. Then they won 4-3 against Chicago before drawing 1-1 against Inter Miami and then winning 4-0 against New England. That game really feels like it was a turning point for the Charlotte FC team. Prior to that point, this Charlotte team looked like they were heading to one and done category, but all of a sudden, Dean Smith has really got this team playing back to where they were in July. A team that, again, I've said before, this is a dark horse team in the Eastern Conference. This is a team that can really surprise a lot of people, and especially of how good defensively they are. I would not be surprised they could go far, and especially in the playoffs where when you have a lot of these tight games like that, defense having a good defense is going to help a long way. And I also think that this might be a matchup where it could be a low scoring affair. Most of the Charlotte games so far we've seen this season has been relatively low scoring, though when you look at the last couple of games, that doesn't seem like is the case, and that's mainly because it feels like Charlotte has finally found the attack, and some of their DPs in Abada and Pepiel started to contribute on the attack, and that's great news for Charlotte because we know they have a good defense, but now that the attack has put the pressure off of that defense, again, this is a dangerous team, and against an Orlando City side that, yes, I know they have had a good second half of the season, and this is a matchup between two really hot team. Again, Florida is a team that I've said before. I don't think this is a matchup that Orlando wants. And again, as I mentioned about Miami, who they don't want to really face at least in the first round. I would say Orlando definitely did not want to see Charlotte in the first round. They would rather want a much easier lower seed than what Charlotte FC can provide in this first round. But either way, this should be a heck of a matchup and could be maybe a toss up in terms of who wins this best of three series. Then we get to the next one, which is Cincinnati versus NYCFC. And remember what I mentioned, how both Cincinnati and NYCFC, they of course play in the Leagues Cup, and then I of course mistaken saying that of course is not the case. That actually was the case. They did actually play in the Leagues Cup, and I'm pretty sure NYCFC fans that does not want to remember that game. I mean, they absolutely collapsed in that game against Cincinnati, giving 4 unanswered goals late in the game, and now they get to play them again in the playoffs. In game number one, it's going to be October 28th at 6:45 p.m. Eastern, 3:45 p.m. Pacific. Then game number two will be November 2nd at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. For a while, this was a to be determined because obviously the Yankees made it to the World Series, so that means NYCFC, at least for maybe that game, is not going to be able to play at their usual home. So they said they're going to be playing at Citi Field in this game, and then game number three, if necessary, November 9th at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. All-time meeting 7-2-5 in favor of NYCFC, and the last five head-to-head matchup, NYCFC won the last matchup between both of these teams. 3-2 win against Cincinnati before it was a 1-0 Cincinnati win against NYCFC, and then Cincinnati winning 3-0 against NYCFC. Then Cincinnati winning 3-1 against NYCFC before it was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams. And of course, if you include the Leeds Cup, where Cincinnati was able to win 4-2 against NYCFC, Cincinnati has started to get the better over NYCFC. But if there was one thing, as I mentioned, with these two teams, for Cincinnati, this is a team that does not do very well at home, and it's kind of weird that game one should be very interesting because you got a team that is not very good on the road, that is NYCFC, against a team that hasn't been very good this season at home, that is Cincinnati. That first game could be a big story point heading into the rest of these best of three, because heading into game number two, you never know. Like, while yes, NYCFC is get to play at home at Citi Field, a place that they have won games as well. Cincinnati is one of the best road teams, so yeah, that could be interesting to see how that could be maybe the decider as well. But looking at the last five games for Cincinnati, yeah, besides that 2-1 win that they had against the Union, they kind of head into this playoff relatively cold. They lost 3-1 against Orlando, losing 3-2 against NYCFC, losing 2-1 at home against LAFC, and then drawing 2-2 against Nashville. For NYCFC, they lost 2-0 on decision day against Montreal, but before that, they were actually in really good form. They won 3-1 against Nashville, won 3-2 against Cincinnati, won 5-1 against NYCFC, I'm sorry, 5-1 against the New York Red Bulls. They obviously did not win 5-1 against themselves. And then they had a good 1-1 draw against Inter Miami. That was the James Sands heroic game, scoring the late equalizer to salvage a draw for NYCFC. And really, again, as long as if NYCFC is playing at home, this team has a chance to win games. But again, they don't have the home field advantage in this one. But then again, as I said, Cincinnati hasn't been very good this season at home, so something's gonna have to give in terms of this matchup. I do think Cincinnati is still the favorites. Consider they in terms of experience, they have the better playoff experience compared to this NYCFC team. That, yes, I know they've been to playoffs before, and they also have Maxi Morales on their team. He has tons of playoff experience, but besides that, there's a lot of young guys on this team that doesn't really have a lot of playoff experience. So that could be a difference in between both of these teams as well. And then we move on to the last Eastern Conference first round matchup that we're going to preview, and that is Columbus versus the New York Red Bulls. So out of all of these games, this one is probably the most one-sided. You could maybe argue that this could be the case, but I do think that Atlanta could definitely give Inter Miami something of a fight. Consider, again, they have had Inter Miami number at least in the last couple of meetings, but this one, not so much. I mean, we all know that the New York Red Bulls might be a team that is one and done, though I said that about Vancouver, and look what happened. Though, again, you expect that Columbus should easily win this best of three series. But that being said, game number one at Lower.com Field will be on October 29th at 6:45 p.m. Eastern, 3:45 p.m. Pacific. And really, just like this matchup, a lot of these games are going to be late afternoon games. Game two, November 3rd, 4:30 p.m. Eastern, 1:30 p.m. Pacific. And then if there is going to be a game 3, it'll be 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. All-time meeting 41, 13, and 35 in favor of the Crew. Last 5 head-to-head matchup, it was Columbus winning 3-2 against the Red Bulls, before Columbus winning 3-0 against the Red Bulls. Then Columbus won 2-1 against the Red Bulls, before the Red Bulls did win 2-1 against Columbus, though Columbus returned the favor by winning 2-1 themselves at home against the New York Red Bulls. Looking at the last five games for Columbus, they won 3-2 on the road against the Red Bulls. Again, this is a matchup that we saw on decision day, and if that was kind of maybe something to come in terms of what we'll see in the best of 3 matchup, again, it feels like that so Metro moment is going to once again happen to this Red Bulls team. Then it was a 4-0 win that Columbus had against New England before winning 3-2 against the Union at home. Then they did lose in that heavyweight matchup against Inter Miami before they drew 2-2 in the game against DC United. For the Red Bulls, as I mentioned, they lost 3-2 at home against Columbus on decision day. Then they lost 2-1 on the road against Atlanta. Then they did win 4-1 against Toronto. But that was really the only big win that they had before they got absolutely smacked by NYCFC at home 5-1, and then they drew 2-2 against Atlanta United. And as I mentioned, this is a Red Bulls team that is not heading into the playoffs in form whatsoever. They haven't really been playing well at all for the majority of the second half of the season, and part of that is because of the lack of finishing. The lack of finishing has really killed any chance of this team to be a competitive team. And when you're facing the likes of the Columbus Crew, yeah, you better finish your chances, because Columbus is going to be a team that, while they are going to give the Red Bulls some chances, this is a team that is lethal in front of goal. And again, I do expect Columbus should be able to move on to the next round. The Red Bulls are just hoping that they can do what we start to see, at least in the beginning of the playoffs, which is it's been very unpredictable, and past form and also past failure has kind of been completely forgotten as the playoffs has started. With that being said, I am now going to switch boards and now looking at the Western Conference game in terms of the first round matchup, and we're going to preview those games right now. So now we move on to another 2v7 matchup, and that, of course, is the Galaxy versus the Rapids. And just like the other 2v7 matchup, this matchup might not be a contest, though I will say this. I would give Colorado more of a chance to pull off the major upset against a 2 seed compared to the New York Red Bulls. And I know Colorado, they have a lot of problems lately, and not to mention injuries has also played a big part to that. They're not going to have Georgi Mihailovic presumably pretty much for the rest of the season. But if there's one thing that at least the Rapids might have hope, is that, again, the Galaxy, as good as they are when it comes to goal scoring, their defense has not been great whatsoever this season. And in the playoffs, I've said it many times before, and I'll say it again, you can't simply just keep outscoring your opponent and expect that would be a successful way to keep winning games. In the playoffs, things can get really tight, and this kind of brand of soccer that the Galaxy have played, while it's been successful throughout the regular season, I don't think it's going to be a recipe to try to get you all the way to MLS Cup, as this team is definitely one of those teams that is competing for MLS Cup. With that being said, game number 1 is a very late one, 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific. That is, I guess, because these are the two West Coast team. Well, Colorado is not really on the West Coast, but they're on Mountain Time Zone, so they're only 1 hour ahead, even though it's going to be a relatively late game too. But yeah, very late one, 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific. Then after that, they play on November 1st, 9:30 p.m. Eastern, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. And then on November 9th, they play at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. A lot of these Western Conference games are basically not either early night games or just late night game, because I think apparently the league decided that we're gonna have all the Eastern Conference game happening in the day, and then basically have the night game happening in the Western Conference, just like what we see on decision day as well. All-time meeting 47, 13, and 34 in favor of the Galaxy. The last 5 head-to-head matchup, it was not long ago that the Galaxy did win 3-1 on the road against Colorado before they won 3-2 against the Rapids. Then it was a 0-0 draw between both of these teams. Then the Rapids actually won 3-1 against the Galaxy. But then after that, it was the Galaxy winning 4-1 against Colorado. So the Galaxy has pretty much looked the better side, at least in the last 5 head-to-head matchup. Though looking at the last 5 games, again, for the Galaxy, they probably would have been playing against the Vancouver Whitecaps if they didn't lose 2-1 to Houston. And I said this when I was filling the bracket. Short term, I think this is not a bad thing for them to not get that number 1 seed and let that number 1 seed slip out of their hand on decision day, because they play against a Rapids team that, compared to playing against the Rapids, then Vancouver, who pretty much have all the momentum now after that 5-0 thrashing that they had against the Portland Timbers, this might not be a bad idea that the Galaxy is playing against an injury battle Rapids team, and then probably have a better shot moving on compared to if they play the Vancouver Whitecaps. But that being said, for Colorado, they lost 3-2 against Austin, lost 1-0 against Seattle. They did oh, actually, I got this one wrong. It's actually, I got this reverse. It should be Galaxy winning 3-1 against Colorado. Colorado obviously did not win 3-1 against the Galaxy. But before that, it was them losing 3-0 to Minnesota, and then they did win 2-0 against Toronto, but they're on a 4-game losing streak heading to the playoffs. And I know I said before, when it comes to losing streak, it doesn't really matter once you get into the playoffs, as Vancouver has taught us. But that's not a good run of form. And as I said, they are without some of their best weapon. Georgi Mihailovic not available in this series, and pretty much maybe for the rest of the season. And there's even the question of the health of Cole Bassett as well, another key piece to this Colorado attack. And when you have to face against a lethal Galaxy team, you need every single attacking help that they better hope that Rafael Aho will have an absolute monster game, or else this could be pretty easy for the Galaxy to move on into the next round. That being said, moving on to the other LA team, that is LAFC. So they play against the Vancouver Whitecaps in a matchup that is a rematch of the first round matchup of last year. And Vancouver won blood after what happened last year as well. And I will also say that, for LAFC, I mean, if you ask them who would they rather face, do they face Portland or do they face Vancouver? Some might say they face Vancouver because, Vancouver hasn't been playing well, but after that 5-0 thrashing that Vancouver had against Portland, yeah, I'm pretty sure some of those LAFC fans might have other ideas, especially the fact that I'm pretty sure LAFC is probably tired of playing Vancouver, or kind of the other way around, because both of these teams have played each other so many times, really in the last 2 years, and not to mention they play each other in the Leeds Cup as well, and Vancouver won that one in the PK shootout. And by the way, in these best of three series, it's pretty much Leeds Cup rule, where if the game ends in a draw, it will go into a PK shootout. So if this was similar to what we saw in the Leeds Cup, Vancouver probably would have had a 1-0 advantage heading into game two, playing at home. And when I say they're playing at home, they're actually going to be able to play at BC Place, unlike what we saw in the play-in round. But that being said, game number one will happen on October 27, 9:45 p.m. Eastern, 6:45 p.m. Pacific. Game two, of course, will be at BC Play, unless any last minute event that caused BC Place to not be available for the Whitecaps. November 3rd, 8:45 p.m. Eastern, 5:45 p.m. Pacific. And then if there is a game free, it's a very late one. November 8th, 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific. Now, in terms of the all-time meeting, it's 10-4, 4 and 6 in favor of in favor of LAFC. The last five head-to-head matchup, LAFC won 2-1 against the Whitecaps. Then it was them winning 3-0 against the Whitecaps before LAFC won 1-0 against the Whitecaps. Then LAFC won 5-2 against the Whitecaps, and then it was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams. And it's been kind of one-sided when it comes to when both of these teams meet each other. So I guess in some way maybe LAFC want to face Vancouver based on the fact that they had a good history against the Whitecaps, at least in the last five head-to-head matchup. And really heading into the playoffs, I mean, LAFC is probably the hottest team right now heading into the playoffs. I mean, maybe besides Minnesota, or even you can make a case for RSL too. So I'll talk about why that is the case. LAFC have won all five games heading into the playoffs. In fact, they have not lost a game ever since they won the U.S. Open Cup, or draw a game ever since they won the U.S. Open Cup. They won 3-1 against the Quakes on decision day. They won 2-1 on the road against Vancouver, won 3-0 on the road against Sporting KC, won 1-0 against St. Louis, and then winning 2-1 on the road against Cincinnati. For Vancouver, as I mentioned, they won 5-0 against the Timbers, and probably right now already the biggest surprise of the playoffs, and maybe one of the biggest shocker in the playoffs in MLS history as well. But before that, they lost 2-1 to RSL, lose 2-1 to LAFC, lose 1-0 at home against Minnesota, and then losing 3-0 against Seattle. So again, if you're Colorado fans, looking at Vancouver form and how they were able to win their playoff matchup, that maybe gives you some hope that yes, you come into the playoffs on a 4-game losing streak, but look what Vancouver did. They somehow turned things around, and now all of a sudden, again, they have all the momentum heading into this game against LAFC. And again, if I know LAFC has, again, can definitely stifle a team, especially when they're playing at home, even if the other team has a lot of momentum. But Vancouver's going to give it a go in this one. They're going to be very confident coming into this game against LAFC, and we'll see if LAFC can respond. I mean, ideally, LAFC is still heavy favorites to win this game, and I do believe they are definitely the team to beat in the Western Conference for the third year in a row. I mean, it kind of makes sense because the road to MLS Cup will have to go through BMO Stadium this year. But yeah, moving on in the next matchup, we got the Seattle Sounders versus the Houston Dynamo. So this is again a 4v5 seed, though. Unlike Charlotte and Orlando, this 4v5 seed seems to be more in favor of the team that it is the fourth seed, that is the Sounders, because the Sounders has had the Dynamo number. And again, for the Houston Dynamo, in theory, it wasn't kind of a great idea that they won that game against the Galaxy, because had they won that law or drew that game against the Galaxy, they would have been the number six seed, and they would have played against RSL, a team that they pretty much absolutely owned in both the regular season and in the playoffs the last couple of years. And now instead they kind of have to play against a team that kind of owns them. Not just in the playoffs lately, but really in terms of the all-time meeting as well. But in terms of game number one, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. The second game, 6:30 p.m. Eastern, 3:30 p.m. Pacific. And then game number three will be 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. So this is really kind of the only Western Conference game where all the games, well, all but one game is not going to be a night game, and you could say this is sort of a night game that is. A lot of these early kickoff are usually the Eastern Conference matchup. But last five head-to-head matchup, 1-0 win for Seattle over Houston. Then it was a 2-2 draw between both of these teams. Seattle then win 1-0 against Houston. Then Seattle win 1-0 against the Dynamo, and then Seattle win 2-1 against the Houston Dynamo. Yeah, it hasn't been good going for the Dynamo when it comes to them facing against the Sounders. The last five games for the Sounders, they did drew 1-1 against the Timbers, which unfortunately that was not enough to win Cascadia Cup, but they did win 1-0 on the road against Colorado, winning 3-0 on the road against Vancouver, winning 1-0 against the Dynamo, and then drawing 2-2 against the San Jose Earthquakes, because for whatever reason, they cannot beat the San Jose Earthquakes, not just this season, but really for the past couple of years too. I would have never thought that the Quakes would have Seattle number after just a couple of years ago. It was the opposite. It was Seattle having the Quakes number all those years. For Houston, they did win 2-1 against the Galaxy in a dramatic fashion to get them into the game. And again, on theory, it might not be a great idea that they won that game, consider who they face in the first round. But before that, they did lose 3-0 against St. Louis. I was in person for that game. Yeah, it was not a great game for the Houston Dynamo. Probably the worst road game that they had all season long for a team that is very good this season on the road. Then they won 2-1 against New England, lost 1-0 against the Sounders, and then won 1-0 on the road against Austin FC. Now, the good news for Houston is that, throughout the run of form that it's been kind of inconsistent for the Dynamo. At least they have most of their attacking pieces back, and they're going to have Hector Herrera back, who they really hope he's going to be the difference maker of this team, as we seen last season. That was kind of the case alongside with Griffin Dorsey, and they kind of need it because again, this is a Sounders team that is definitely feeling himself confident heading into the playoffs. And although they themselves will unfortunately might have to run the gauntlet of facing against a team that simply owned them the last couple of head-to-head meeting, that is LAFC, potentially, that those two teams are going to face in the next round. At least they could say that at least they have the confidence that, yeah, they have the Dynamo number. And I know, again, in the playoffs, maybe past narrative might be put aside. At least that's kind of the storyline early in this playoffs. But we have also seen this season, ownage is ownage when it comes to the head-to-head meeting. When a team simply owns the other team, usually that team that has the ownage is going to pull out the victory. And again, many people would expect Seattle should be able to move on, and the Dynamo, doesn't seem like they might be able to repeat what they did last year, heading into this season as well. So that being said, moving on, we got Real Salt Lake versus Minnesota. So this is a game where, besides the Charlotte and Orlando game, I think a lot of people pick this as an upset, and I don't blame people of picking an upset, because it's between one team that is Minnesota, that is in a red hot form. They won 4 out of their last 5 games on a 5 game unbeaten streak. Whereas for RSL, it's hard to believe, but they actually themselves are on an unbeaten streak as well. You wouldn't have guessed that RSL is on an unbeaten streak. They actually have a longer unbeaten streak than Minnesota. They have a 6-game unbeaten streak. So theoretically, they should also be pretty hot. But the problem for RSL and why nobody has considered them to have a hot streak. Well, we'll talk about that looking at the last 5 games. But in terms of game number one, and what's kind of weird is that this is the only playoff series where all the games are going to start exactly at the same time. Game number one starts on October 29th at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Game number two, November 2nd, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Also, newsflash, I am going to this game as well. Yes, I am actually going to be attending a playoff game. I'm very excited to do so at Allianz Field. Hopefully, by then, we'll be celebrating Minnesota potentially moving on into the next round, at least as a Loons fan, rather than maybe forcing a game free or even worse, losing that game and ending the season. But game number three will be happening on November 8th if necessary, and also at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. All-time meeting, there's been a lot of draws in both of these. When both of these teams have played each other 5-9-3. So that if that's the case, yeah, there's going to be maybe PKs is going to once again decide, and this could be similar to what we saw last year between RSL and Houston, where those matchup were very close, and PKs pretty much kind of decide those matchup. And if that is the case, I mean, I want to say that may be in favor of Minnesota because Minnesota has had a pretty good record when it comes to PK shootout. Just don't look at what they did against Dallas, that is. But I would prefer not to have that happen. Though when you look at the last 5 head-to-head matchup, it kind of shows you why we have 9 draws in this. The last game, yeah, let's not talk about that game. I mean, that was one of the worst game I've ever seen this season. When it comes to entertaining style, it was a 0-0 draw that both of these teams played. That was just ugly soccer all over the pitch. Nobody could do anything at all in that game. Then it was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams. Then it was a 2-2 draw between both of these teams. That was a game I remember Minnesota had a 2-0 lead, only to basically had Rohifmo happen and drew 2-2 in that game. Then they drew 1-1 against RSL, and then RSL winning 3-0 against Minnesota. Last 5 games for RSL, again, they're on a 6-game unbeaten streak. They should be considered a red hot team. Here's why they're not. They won 2-1 against Vancouver. Yes, I know this is the same Vancouver that won 5-0 against the Portland Timbers, but this was before that happened. This was a Vancouver team that had no confidence whatsoever. And that game, really, the 2 goals that scored by RSL was a moment of magic for Diego Luna, which I think that is going to be the guy that they're going to really heavily rely on. They want to have a chance to move on into the next round. And then the other goal that they scored was an own goal by the goalkeeper. Then they won 1-0 against the Quakes. I mean, that was very unconvincing in that game against the Quakes. They didn't play well. And again, it was once again, I think Diego Luna, the only guy that scored the only goal of this game. And then before that, it was just a nightmare 0-0 draw that no one wanted to remember that game. And then they drew 2-2 against Austin in a game where they had 2-0 lead and they blew it in that game against Austin. And then that was kind of the same thing against the Timbers. They were winning 3-2 late in that game, only to give up a late goal. So that's another thing that I think Real Salt Lake is going to be concerned with the way that they are giving up late goals late in the game. That is not a great recipe in terms of moving on to the playoffs, of giving up late goals and potentially losing the result. It's kind of funny I say that with RSL because that was a problem Minnesota had in the beginning of, or at least in the middle part of the season. It hasn't been the case. And again, the reason why Minnesota has been red hot, look at their last 5 head-to-head result. They won 4-1 against St. Louis. Yes, St. Louis is not a good team, but they still absolutely throttled them at home, and they look like they're a world beater in that game. They did win 1-0 against Vancouver. That wasn't really a pretty game, but still they did relatively well in that one, considering Minnesota hasn't had a good history against the Whitecaps on the road. Then of course we talk about the nightmare 0-0 draw game that we saw between both of these teams. And then they won 3-0 against a Rapids team that back then this was a very confident Rapids team at that point has not looked that outbeat in that game. As we have seen throughout the season. And again, that was a game where Minnesota has coming into the game. They had their issue in terms of winning game at home, and then they were able to win 2-0 against Sporting KC. Yes, I know Sporting KC has not done very well, but keep in mind Minnesota has never beaten Sporting KC at Chosen Mercy Park in the regular season. So there's no doubt that I think the resume has been more impressive for Minnesota when it comes to the last 5 games. But again, as I said throughout this video, it doesn't matter how you do in the last 5 games and heading into playoffs. Again, everything is brand new. My only hope is that that also could be the case when it comes to the entertainment of this game. I mean, as a Loons fan, I would definitely won't mind if I see my team able to get the win and able to squeeze out some of these wins. But in terms of entertainment wise, let's not have another 0-0 draw like what we saw last time. Let's not have that kind of, because if that's kind of how this series is gonna go, oh man, I want to send my condolence to everyone that is going to be tuning in into this game. It could be pretty ugly in terms of how the quality of soccer would be in this game. And not to mention, I would also there's been some bad blood between both of these teams too. Remember last time in that 0-0 draw, and that forgettable 0-0 draw, the really big storyline coming out of that one was the Brian Vera situation, spitting on Michael Boxall. Of course, got himself a free game suspension, and that also included in the playoffs as well. He's not going to be available for game number 1 as well, but if he's available for game number 2, I wonder how much bad blood that's gonna boil over, and whether or not that could carry over into this game as well. So yeah, when it comes to entertainment wise, don't expect that in terms on the quality wise. But when it comes to just drama, kind of extracurricular activity, you better believe there could be that in this one, because again, for whatever reason, both of these teams, they tend to not really like each other when they face against each other, and you wouldn't expect Minnesota and Real Salt Lake would have a rivalry between both of these teams, but that's kind of how it is the last couple of times when both of these teams met each other. But there you have it. That is pretty much it in terms of wrapping up looking at all of these first round matchups. As always, let me know in the comments below what do you think of these first round matchups, and let me know in the comments below your prediction of who's going to be moving on. Obviously, I made my prediction already when I filled in the bracket, and I'm already very nervous about that because I would not be surprised I got most of them wrong. I mean, just for the love of God, please tell me at least I got half of these right. I mean, I cannot go over for eight again, and I cannot be having a similar situation like I did in the Leeds Cup bracket that I fell in, where it was just completely wrong, and it was wrong by day number 1 as well. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.